Hello, my name is James Knox. I'm chairman of the Boswell Book Festival, but also director of the Fleming Collection, an arts charity which promotes Scottish art and creativity throughout Scotland and beyond. The Fleming Collection is also an actual collection of paintings, which we tour to regional galleries across the UK as part of our cultural diplomacy. The collection itself is deemed to be the most important collection of Scottish art, which dates from the 17th century to the present day, outside the fine collections in museums and art galleries. In this series, in which we explore the links between painted portraiture and biography, I'm going to be talking about two important Scottish women artists. The first is Phoebe Anna Traquair, who sprang to prominence in the late 19th century as one of the leading artists in the arts and crafts style in Edinburgh. She was born in Dublin in 1852 and died in Edinburgh in 1936. Her childhood in Ireland was very important to her future life as an artist. She was very obsessed with the great Book of Kells in the library of Trinity College Dublin, and the Celtic Revival that was very literary and important at that time in Dublin and Ireland infused the way she became as an artist. She left Ireland as a late teenager, having married an Edinburgh paleontologist called Ramsay Traquair, who went on to become a leading curator of paleontology at the Royal Scottish Museum. And to begin with, Phoebe, who was a very talented artist and draftswoman, drew a lot of Ramsay Traquair's specimens for him that would one day destine, fossils and things which would end up in the museum. But she was a very powerful and creative artistic personality in her own right. And actually, she went on to become really one of the earliest professionally recognized women artists in Scotland. When I started at the Fleming Collection as director in 2015, I was asked to draw up a list of a wish list of acquisitions to build on the importance of the collection. And very, very top of my list was works by Phoebe Anna Traquair. And this gathered a greater urgency when in 2017, I was hosting an event in the British Embassy in Dublin, where the Fleming Collection, which as one of its charitable goals is to promote Scottish art and creativity across the UK and beyond, I was hosting an event exploring the links between Scottish and Irish arts and creativity. And this was at the moment when the Fleming Collection had hung the British Embassy with works, Scottish works from our collection. So if you go to the British Embassy in Dublin, you will see these amazing Scottish paintings from the 19th and 20th and 21st centuries on display, both in the Scottish Government hub there and in the main display areas. When I was talking about the links between Ireland and Scotland, of course, Phoebe Anna Traquair is a key figure because she was in Scotland one of the leaders, not just of the arts and crafts movement, but also of the Celtic Revival. And of course, this was, as I said earlier, informed by her great Irish root. And after my talk, the director of the National Gallery of Ireland came up to me and said, they didn't have any Phoebe Anna Traquairs, and in fact, his curatorial team nor he had she wasn't really on their radar. And I realized then that actually not many people really knew about Phoebe Anna Traquair and her importance. One reason for this is that she is now rare, and the other is that she was multi-talented. So she designed craft objects, she designed embroideries and tapestries. Significantly, her greatest works are murals, which of course are very hard often to access. But also she was a very, very gifted artist. but it's very rare when Phoebe Anna Traquair works come up for sale. And I had to wait impatiently until actually October of 2020. So we had a very fierce battle at the auction. It was very nerve-wracking, but I'm very pleased to say that we acquired the 3 works that I really wanted, because they showed every aspect of her work. And the most jewel-like work I'm showing now, which is a wonderful watercolor of her 5-year-old daughter called Hilda. And why this is important is that it shows Hilda as a child of the early Italian Renaissance. Phoebe Anna Traquair had this empathy for the past. And if you go and see her murals, and you can see one of her great murals in the church in Mansfield Place, which is now called Mansfield Place Trequare Centre. You can also see her murals in the choir school of the Episcopalian Cathedral of Edinburgh. But as you can see, it's hard to see the murals. You can't just walk in and see them. That is why her art was sought after at Bonhams, and none more so than this absolutely exquisite watercolor, which shows everything about how she was steeped in those great early Italian masters, the beauty of the color, and yet it's also very much of the 1880s. There are aspects a bit of the pre-Raphaelites in it, but also there's a freedom to it, like the black, the black sort of waistband round the little girl's waist. And it's a completely poetic and wonderful, wonderful piece. And it's small, but it packs a huge punch. Phoebe Anna Traquair, as I said, was one of the first Scottish women artists to get professional recognition. And she had a full life, married to Ramsay, but she was a full-time painter and designer. And she was made a member of quite rightly, an associate of the Royal Scottish Academy. The next portrait that I'm looking at is by Dorothy Johnson, who was exactly 40 years younger than Phoebe Anna Traquair, born in 1892, and she lived until 1980. This is an absolutely staggering picture. I think it's one of the greatest paintings in the Fleming Collection. Dorothy Johnson was a prodigy. She was born in Edinburgh, and she went to Edinburgh Art College, age 16, before the First World War. And by 1914, at the outbreak of war, she was hired to teach art at the Art College, which she did throughout the war. While she'd been at Art College, she met and befriended 2 fellow students, an artist called Cecile Walton and another artist called Eric Robertson. This portrait is of Cecile Walton. Dorothy's great friend, Cecil Walton, sprang from one of the greatest artistic dynasties of Glasgow. Her father was the renowned Glasgow boy painter called E.A. Walton. Her uncle was George Walton, who worked with Charles Rennie Mackintosh. And she had 3 aunts, 2 of whom were great ceramicists, and the other was a very great artist. The artist was called Constance, and the ceramicists who taught at the Glasgow School of Art were Hannah and I think Helen. So Cecile sprang from this family background of this ferment of creativity, and arrived at Edinburgh College of Art to join forces with Dorothy Johnson and Eric Robertson. And Cecile and Dorothy became incredibly close friends as art students, as did Eric Robertson, who was a very flamboyant and unorthodox artist and man. Eric went off to be an ambulance driver during the First World War. Dorothy, meanwhile, was teaching at Edinburgh Art College. And during the summers, she would go to the exquisite artist town called Kirkcudbright, which is in Galloway in southwest Scotland, which has a long history of attracting artists going back to the 1830s. And in 1917, Dorothy asked Cecile to come and work with her in Kirkcudbright. And this painting was painted in 1918. And it is a joyous celebration of their friendship. And you see in the painting the vibrancy of the color, which has to be indebted to the great Scottish colorist, Samuel Peploe, who equally had spent a lot of time in Kirkcudbright during the First World War and knew Dorothy. And people ask, are there any disciples or followers of the four Scottish colorists? And this is one. Dorothy was not exactly a disciple, but this painting reflects a lot of those primary colors, that real courage when it came to using primary colors, which the colorists themselves had picked up from the French painters. And here it is in all its joyousness. Cecil Walton was a superb artist, absolutely of the same rank and quality as her close friend Dorothy Johnson. And a work by Cecil Walton was very much on my hit list to acquire for the Fleming Collection, which I was able to do in 2018. And I acquired a wonderful symbolist painting inspired by Dorothy Johnson and her son. In 1924, Dorothy Johnson and Cecil Walton staged a double exhibition in Edinburgh to rave reviews. The Studio magazine, which was a hugely influential contemporary publication with international reach, they now rather condescendingly described the power of these two artists and as being the brilliant daughters of Scotland, which nowadays we would not probably refer to any artist, either son or daughter, as. But in those days, this was an incredible critical acclaim for their work. Tragically, it was actually the peak of both their careers. They were still young women. They were actually women artists, or artists painting in their prime, getting international attention. But in 1924, Dorothy Johnson married a fellow teacher at Edinburgh College of Art called James Macbeth Sutherland, who himself is a good 1920s colorist, post-colorist painter. But because there was a rule at Edinburgh College of Art that if you were a married woman teacher and you married another teacher, you then had to stop teaching. So Dorothy had to resign her role, which she found immensely stimulating and productive at Edinburgh College of Art, in favor of her husband. Meanwhile, Cecile had divorced Eric. And so from really 1924, both artists, Dorothy and Cecile, lost momentum as creators. They went on painting for the rest of their careers, but never again did they really reach the heights of those early 1920s pictures. And this was not their fault. This was the conditions of the time. If you like, the patriarchy won out on this one. And it's very tragic that it did, because these two wonderful women, wonderful artists, one of whom inspired this fantastic portrait by the other, deserved better.